Africa is the cradle of mankind, but is nothing to show for it. Despite abundant natural resources, the continent is exploited by the rich countries of the north, who use it as a source of cheap raw materials and market for their finished goods. The continent's lifestyle has been dislocated from the days of slavery, when Africa was stripped of its labor. Sponsored conflicts arose, courtesy of Western imperialists, who today pontificate over human rights as a way of covering up for their heinous crimes against humanity. But is Africa a dark continent? Did the imperialists bring civilization to Africa in the name of education, Christianity, and Islam? Was the continent devoid of science, technology, and innovation? Who are the African people and what are their values? Scholars on Pan-African history assert the story of Africa, its people, and their history is greatly misunderstood and needs to be rewritten in its proper context and perspective. This will enable Africans understand themselves better. Only after a renaissance in education and culture will Africa develop as a continent. It was for this reason President Robert Mugabe joined leaders from African countries in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, for the 6th African Union Summit on January 23 and 24, 2006. The theme was education and culture.
أبو سانغو رئيس الاتحاد الأفريقي الإخوة أصحاب الفخامة.
Host President Omar al-Bashir welcomed guests and spoke passionately about Africa and Sudan's contribution to the development of civilizations worldwide. He thanked the AU for its role in helping bring peace to the Sudan, the continent's biggest country and home to about 35 million people. Outgoing chairman, Nigeria's President Olusegun Obasanjo, highlights the need for a cultural renaissance.
On the relationship between culture and education, especially their centrality to our survival, prosperity, and development as a continent. We must interrogate history to see how much we have lost from our communal values, the impact of foreign values and cultures, the implications not just for family and community, but also for peace, security, and development. Culture is the essential cement of every social group. It is the primary means of intercommunication as well as interaction with the outside world. It is therefore the soul, the anchor, the ability and the capacity for identity, stability, and change. Culture, in its widest and most complete sense, is the means through which people give shape and meaning to their lives, convey the social, political, economic, and technical fields of human endeavor. Our people that fail to value their culture cannot value history, identify and protect those specific issues that give them identity and strength, and they cannot make progress. From this perspective, therefore, the interlinkage between culture and education cannot be overemphasized. Having said that, I will leave the rest of my brothers and colleagues of Algeria, President Bouteflika ably represented, and President Kibaki of Kenya, who shortly will be speaking to us on education and culture, in view of the fact that their two countries hosted the ministerial conferences on education and culture, respectively. On this note, I welcome our invited guests, Professor Aluma Sui, and Director General of UNESCO, whose presence here with us is an affirmation of our collective resolve to work with renewed vigor and determination to refocus attention on the important issues of education and culture. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, permit me to express my sincere appreciation for our collective efforts in repositioning Africa for peace, security, stability, development, and democracy. We have demonstrated our preference for democracy and peace in all their ramifications, and thereby we have started to turn around the view of an Africa characterized by endless violence. Your Excellencies, at the last summit, we recommitted ourselves to continue to seek amicable political settlement in situations where conflicts persisted. Similarly, you will recall that we also mandated some follow-up actions or a number of initiatives where the final position of our Union remained pending. This, of course, is in the realization that it is only when peace and security reign that the dividends of our reform efforts will translate into socio-economic development and happiness of our long-suffering peoples. This summit gives us the opportunity to review critically these situations and to take stock of the achievements that have been made, as well as the challenges that still lie ahead of us. On the UN Security Council reform held in Bamako on 2nd December 2005, decided to submit the draft resolution on the African Common Position to the United Nations General Assembly, as was decided by the AU Extraordinary Summit of 31st October 2005. Consequently, the draft, which embodied the CERT declaration, was resubmitted. The summit should call upon the mechanism to ensure that action is taken on the draft by the General Assembly when it resumes. To this effect, an appropriate draft decision will be submitted to the summit. The future of our continent that is now receiving international investment must be one that is free of conflicts, hunger, disease, and want. It is also one that has evolved into a zone of peace where its resources are exploited for the sole purpose of developing its societies, where despair has yielded way to hope, and where the security of generations yet unborn has been guaranteed today through good practices in governance.
is the tradition of the African Union. After the opening session, the presidents and leaders retreated for a closed-door session during which they engaged in no-holds-barred discussions on some of the issues dogging the continent. The question of the AU chairmanship and the grouping's position on the United Nations reforms dominated debate. Africa is calling for a radical reform of the United Nations Security Council and demanding veto power. On the issue of the chairmanship, a committee of 7 was set up and chaired by President Festus Mogae of Botswana, with President Mugabe, President Blaise Compaoré of Burkina Faso, President Omar Gula of Djibouti, President Omar Bongo of Gabon, and President Jakaya Kikwete of Tanzania, along with the Foreign Minister of Egypt.
Some wanted Nigeria to continue, but others wanted another country, and Central Africa, Gabon, Congo Republic, etc. thought it was there to then be their turn if East Africa did not have it through President Bashir. And so this took us about 4 hours discussing. Eventually, to make things easy for us and more comfortable, President Bashir said, fine, he is prepared to forego his, candidature being considered for a year. And this is what helped the situation. And we said, in that case, let us definitely say, whatever the circumstances, Sudan should have it come 2007. So we are happy that this is now the position, and Central Africa then presented a candidate, Sassou Nguesso, and he is our current chairman. So, and of course, this also brings about the issue of rotation. And some people were saying, Nigeria has had it for too long, so no, we cannot have them continue again. And we are happy. But it has all been, done in the spirit, not of conflict, but in the spirit of harmony. And we are very happy.
There are several proposals for the expansion of the UN Security Council from the current 15 members, 5 of them permanent, in China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and 10 non-permanent members elected to 2-year terms. The 53 African Union proposal for the UN Security Council reforms calls for an 11-member expansion with 2 permanent with veto power and 2 non-permanent seats for Africa. The group of 4 position, being sponsored by Germany, Japan, Brazil, and India, seeks to expand the Security Council by adding 6 permanent members but without veto power, 1 each for the G4 members and 2 for Africa, and 4 non-permanent seats elected for 2-year terms. The G4 plan is supported by Britain and France, but strongly opposed by China. The summit noted that not enough had been done to market Africa's position, especially to those countries that enjoy veto power.
We debated the issue of position regarding the Security Council or the United Nations structure in terms of the need for reform. And we got a report on that, which is not very pleasing. Not much was done by way of campaigning for our position, which is that we must have 2 permanent seats on the Security Council, plus 4 or 5 rotational ones. And we have already submitted a resolution in the General Assembly to that effect, so as to get the support of the General Assembly, but it has not been voted on. And this is now what we are going to campaign for. So come the day when it's voted for, we would expect that we get really resounding victory for the majority of the country supporting us, but that won't give us immediately the seats. It's only support of our resolution. We can then say to members of the Security Council, the permanent members, those 5 proud ones, beginning with the United States, the proudest of them all, secondly Britain, the second proudest, and France, the third proudest, China also proud, and Russia. So then we can say to them, well, this is the African position, what do you say? And this is what we were arguing should be our next fight to get us into the Security Council.
The Commission on Human and People's Rights came under fire during the summit, with its continued attempts to vilify Zimbabwe, together with 4 other countries in Ethiopia, Sudan, Uganda and Eritrea, failing owing to serious procedural errors. In the case of Zimbabwe, the Commission tried to resuscitate a report it prepared in 2002, but was thrown out by the AU summit in Addis Ababa in 2004. The Commission also tried to make use of a report prepared by Mrs. Tibaijuka on the Cleanup National Housing Delivery Program, being executed under Operation Garikai Shalani Kuhle, as well as reports from Western-sponsored non-governmental organizations. The Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, Comrade Patrick Chinamasa, described the whole process as a circus and gross miscarriage of justice.
This is the second time that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, based in Banjul, passed a resolution condemning the human rights situation in Zimbabwe. But for the second time, they passed a resolution without giving Zimbabwe the opportunity to respond to the allegations that were made against the country. I now understand that, in fact, some 17 NGOs from Zimbabwe traveled to Banjul, financed, as you know, sponsored and financed by the Western countries, to make unfounded allegations against Zimbabwe. And it's on the basis of those allegations that the Commission passed a resolution condemning Zimbabwe. But they refused to hear the Zimbabwean side of the story. They went into private sessions to which the NGOs were invited, but the Zimbabwe government was not invited. So, in fact, the resolution was passed in violation of the Commission's own rules of procedure and also in violation of the natural principles of natural justice, which require that you cannot accuse and you cannot convict and you cannot condemn without hearing the views and responses of the person you are condemning or seeking to convict. So this is in fact what happened, and we took issue in the meeting of the Executive Council of the African Union, and they agreed that Zimbabwe was not receiving a fair treatment, and accordingly they threw out the resolution and ordered the Commission that in future they should ensure that they do not put forward resolutions against countries without seeking the responses of those countries, and also without tabling before the AU the responses from those countries. There were three main grounds upon which they based their resolution. The first ground was to do with the first report of 2002. In 2002, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights sent a fact-finding mission to Zimbabwe, which produced a hostile resolution against Zimbabwe. But again, they did not give Zimbabwe the opportunity to respond to those allegations. And they sought to table the resolution with the assembly, with the summit, without giving Zimbabwe an opportunity to defend itself. And at that time, the African Union Summit threw out that resolution and ordered them that Zimbabwe be given an opportunity to respond to the allegations. We did so. The matter went back to the summit, and the summit noted our responses and was satisfied with the responses that we gave, and that closed the chapter. But as it turns out, they are recycling the same allegations, bringing up the same report, which in fact became a closed chapter. The second ground upon which they base their resolution is to do with the Tubaijuka report. As you know, she came here at the invitation of our president and at the request of the Secretary General Kofi Annan. She produced a hostile report against us, and Kofi Annan asked us to respond, and we did so in a very detailed manner. And we received a communication from Kofi Annan that he was grateful that we had responded, and especially he was grateful that we had gone into some detail in responding to the various allegations that came up through the Tubaijuka report. Now, that Tubaijuka report was a report for the Secretary General of the United Nations and not of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And yet, without seeking our responses, without channeling specific allegations against us, they based their resolution on the Tubaijuka report. Something is not their document, it's not their matter, they are not privy to the allegations, they are not privy to the responses. And in fact, they passed that resolution without even any sight of the responses that we gave to the Secretary General of the United Nations. So again, that was a gross irregularity on the part of the African Commission. The third ground upon which they sought to base their resolution against Zimbabwe is to do with communications. Under the rules of procedure and the charter which sets up the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, any person who is aggrieved can complain to the Commission. And when the complaint is received by the Commission is enjoined to submit that complaint to 3 stages. The first stage being admissibility. Is the complaint admissible in terms of the rules of procedure? The second stage is the complaint, does the complaint have merit? And finally, if they decide that it has merit, they can go on to make a decision on the matter. 3 stages. Now, there are various complaints which have been forwarded to Banjul, to the African Commission, by the various NGOs in our country, about 17 or 18 of them. And all those complaints are at various stages in the process for determination, and none have gone past the merit stage. A lot of them are still at the admissibility stage, and yet, notwithstanding that they've not yet completed those processes, they rushed to conclude a resolution against Zimbabwe based on the complaints which are still sub judice. That again was a gross violation of rules of procedure and the principles of natural justice. I had the occasion to meet the chairperson of the commission and her deputy, and I raised many issues, in particular in order to clear the air in our relationship with the commission. One of the issues I raised, of course, was that there was the Nyanduga, Commissioner Nyanduga, who came here. The practice And she agreed. The practice has always been they cannot send an envoy to a country, to a member country, without prior consultation with that country, both in terms of the terms of reference and also in terms of the time frame and the date of the venue and everything. Now, in the case of Commissioner Nyanduga, there was no prior consultation. We only got to know about his presence when he had already landed in Harare. And we received a note verbal from the AU to the fact that he was here and he was on a mission. Now, that is unheard of in terms of the practice on the continent and anywhere else. So I raised that issue, and she disowned the Nyanduga as an envoy of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Now, we also know that Professor Konari, who is the executive head of the African Union, has also disowned Nyanduga. He says the AU had no party and he was not an envoy of the AU when he came here. And so what in fact we are going to seek to do is to find out if